So, sorry, it's not called the interwoven, it's called, yes, the interwoven. So, with regard to emptiness, the reasonings of emptiness, so interwoven in the sense that method and wisdom are interwoven in order to have those two combined in order to realize emptiness. So this is the main subject matter, the different reasonings for emptiness, and then mixed with like method and wisdom. So interwoven here means actually mixed or combined, to bring those two parts together. So bring together different types of aspects. So as said before, method and wisdom. And then the third chapter is described as the collections for enlightenment. So in order to become fully enlightened, we need to accumulate a lot of merit. So in order to generate a lot of merit, in order to accumulate a lot of merit, so it is necessary. It's necessary to generate the wish for enlightenment and so forth, and in that way one accumulates a lot of merit. So this is the main subject matter of the third chapter. And then with regard to the fourth chapter, it's called the royal policy. So with regard to a ruler, with regard to a king, so what are the kind of activities such a ruler should engage in? What should the ruler refrain from? What should the ruler politically, what he or she should engage in? So this is explained in the fourth chapter. And then with regard to the fifth chapter, which is so here again, with regard to the subject matter, of course there are a lot of different subject matters, but Rinpoche will talk about the main subject matter. So the kind of activities, the subject matter of the fifth chapter is with regard to the activities one should engage in on a daily basis. So from morning to evening, like having 3 sessions, for example, or during 3 sessions, the kind of main activities one should engage in. For example, the 7 limb prayer and so forth. So these kind of prayers shouldn't be recited on a daily basis. And at the very end of the fifth chapter, that one finds the prayer for the Bodhisattva. So the Bodhisattva prayer. So as it says at the very end about so Rinpoche cited these verses, the merit of having said this had form, it would never fit into realms of the worlds, etc. So these are all prayers that are part of the fifth chapter, and this is something one finds also in other scriptures, that one dedicates one's merit towards all sentient beings. So whatever positive potential one has accumulated, one dedicates it towards all sentient beings. So for the sake of all sentient beings, one dedicates this merit in order to become enlightened oneself for the benefit of all sentient beings. So this is the prayer that is also part of the fifth chapter. As one of the prayers, the kind of last chapter, the last part of this chapter is this particular prayer, the dedication prayer. So this text, the precious garland, it's a kind of an advice to a king. So the Nagarjuna, he gave this text as an advice. He advised the king, and there was some kind of dialogue between the king and Nagarjuna. And so the most important verses one can find in the first chapter. So from the point of view of wisdom or emptiness, so with regard to, for example, this chapter, with regard to this verse 81 and 82, just as a person is not real and so forth. So here the Nagarjuna talks about emptiness, selflessness, and this is something that's very important and very famous. It's spread, this kind of teaching has spread to many places. So therefore this text is considered, especially with regard to those verses, presenting the reasonings of emptiness in a very profound way. saying that the person is not a composite of the 6 constituents, the 4 elements, etc. So the reasoning that is presented here you do not find even in the fundamental wisdom. So the meaning, of course, you can probably find in the fundamental wisdom, but here the way Nagarjuna presents selflessness by way of presenting it through the 4 elements or the 6 constituents, that is unique to this text. And then there are also the kind of greatnesses, the 4 greatnesses by which one practices. So this is also explained in this text here, which is again unique. So this is considered to be very important. So with regard to the how to accumulate merit, how to accumulate more positive potential, it's very difficult to find a text which presents these topics to such a degree. So this is why it's helpful to get a sense of what this text is all about. In the 3rd chapter, for example, so Rinpoche here is speaking about these four greatnesses. So one of them is like from the point of view of the focus of sentient beings. So if one were to focus on just one sentient beings, that would be too small. So it's really from the point of view of focus here. One's focus is all sentient beings. So within 1 second, one focuses. Sorry, I don't know which verse exactly this is, but I guess the verse numbers are different. So with regard to so there are different motivations from the point of view of like when one so here if one focuses on all sentient beings, if that's one's focus, the benefit of all sentient beings, if one does for example a prayer such as the praises to Tara, if it's only for one's own life or for the happiness of this lifetime, it will not even be a dharmic practice. But if one does it for higher rebirth, for example, then it becomes a practice of the Dharma. But then it's also possible to do the praises of Tara in order to become liberated. That would be an even higher motivation. And then the highest motivation is that of wanting to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings, wanting to eliminate all their suffering. So for the benefit of all sentient beings, overcoming their suffering or abandoning their suffering, with this motivation one then generates bodhicitta and does these prayers. So here, this is like the greatness or the greatness of merit here that one accumulates. So from the point of view of the different greatnesses, so you have the one of the focus, you have the one of merit, and so forth. So here when we talk about merit means we have to, in order to become fully enlightened, one has to accumulate merit for 3 countless eons. So within 24 hours, we engage in so many different activities. So there's so many activities we engage in that one thinks it's impossible to accumulate, to do these activities in just 1 hour. In 1 hour. So likewise here, this kind of great. So likewise here, with regard to the great merit, one accumulates. So with regard to this great merit, one has to accumulate here. So one may think that this incredible merit one has to accumulate in order to become fully enlightened, that it's impossible to actually do that. So here, in order for people not to So in order to not become discouraged, not to lose one's kind of determination, one therefore here in the precious Garland is actually explained that there is a way of focusing on all sentient beings and accumulate so much merit that there's no need for it to take a very long time. So thinking that one is... So in particular also what is being explained in this text here is how fortunate one is in the sense of one having this opportunity to do this here, and then one will also not lose one's determination in the sense that one has to accumulate a lot of merit, and there's so many sentient beings as vast as space, but nonetheless there's a great determination that arises in one's continuum because of the explanation given in this text, so that one will not lose one's determination. So despite how long it takes, despite the fact there's so many limitless sentient beings, nonetheless, here Nagarjuna has a way of explaining this, that there's a specific way in which one generates determination and does not lose one's determination. So this is something unique to this text here of Nagarjuna's texts with regard to fostering one's determination, etc. And in particular here also going back to these two verses of saying that the person is not any of the constituents and so forth. Oh, and then also, with regard to this verse, this is very unique. But then also, if it goes at the 5th chapter, in the 5th chapter, again, one does this prayer directed towards all sentient beings, and it's a prayer that's considered to be very important, that one dedicates one's merit, etc., everything to sentient beings. So these verses that one finds, for example, at the end of the 5th chapter, they are recited in many other texts too. So then in a lot of other texts, this particular prayer is also cited, so to help others or help practitioners to dedicate their merit. And so this should serve as some kind of rough introduction, a rough kind of explanation. And then from there, what Rinpoche would like to do is now question and answers. So with regard to this question, so preserving the environment, for example, so to preserve the environment and to benefit other sentient beings. So if this is one's motivation, then whatever activity one engages in, it will actually become a Dharma practice. So with regard to these 2 points, so when one, for example, preserves the environment, works towards working the environment, one will also, but this becomes a method to becoming fully enlightened. So why to preserve the environment? Because it benefits all sentient beings. It helps all people. So from a point of view of Buddhism, so we talk about all sentient beings have been like our mother. So it benefits people to preserve the environment, to help clean up the environment and so forth. In that way, since it all benefits all sentient beings, so humans and animals, it becomes a beneficial kind of activity. So it's good for the actual place itself, the environment itself, and of course those living beings who live in the place. So having the motivation to preserve the environment, to benefit others, to benefit living beings, then this becomes a cause to become fully enlightened. And one will accumulate great merit, one will accumulate a great amount of positive potential. So it will also it becomes in that way such a practice because of the accumulation of merit that is so necessary for enlightenment. And also while one works for the environment, while one engages in the activity of preserving the environment, so when we work with other people, for instance, so we need to work with other people, we need to be with other people, and so it's actually very difficult to be with others, because if we're on our own, there's no one who gets angry with us, there's no one who deceives us. So we need to be around other people when we do work such as preserving the environment, being deceived, people getting angry and so forth. So one's afflictions will arise as a result of the way one is treated by other people. And in that way, that becomes also a practice, another opportunity to practice, as it is said, for example, in the 6th chapter of Shantideva's text, the Bodhisattva's way of life. If one does any kind of work and is able to identify one's own afflictions in one's own continuum as a result of interaction with other people, that is a great opportunity. And for that reason, one should in that way it becomes a practice of what is described in the 6th chapter of Shantideva's text, as well as in the 8th chapter of Shantideva's text, because in there Shantideva talks about the disadvantages of the self-cherishing attitude. And therefore, engaging in these kind of activities of working with other people and so forth, one has the opportunity to practice the 6th chapter and the 8th chapter of Shantideva's text. And so whatever obstacles that may arise while one does this kind of work, well, we can then transform them into the path. There are practices where one can transform any kind of unconducive conditions, any kind of problems into the path of the Dharma. So in general, when we practice, there's no difference between boys and girls. But there's no difference between the genders, but when we talk about Dharma, why is it that most of the Dharmic activities are done by men, even though there's no difference, it is said in the teachings, that there's no difference between men and women. So in this world, so from the point of view of like education and so from the point of view of education, there's really no actual difference between men and women. I've not really noticed any real difference. But then here, from the point of view of the Tibetan society here, like monks and nuns, so actually, from the point of view of like men and women, like in the ordained kind of, from the point of view of monks and nuns, actually they are equal. It says in the scriptures that they're equal, that there's no difference between them. So when we talk about monks and nuns, the vows, for example, the vows are very, very similar. So there's not much difference. And it's also very clear that there's no real difference between men and women. So of course men and women are not exactly the same, but they have equal rights. So for example, yeah, right. So like also why are men and women, like for example sometimes women are in the back and sometimes men are in the front, but actually in some schools you also find that the women are in the front and the men are in the back. So it just depends on the circumstances, and Rinpoche says he doesn't really know so much about it, but it seems it's just depending on some of the circumstances. Sometimes women are more in the front and sometimes men are more in the front. Sabin. What is Sabin? Parchado. Parcella is So the question is not very clear, but the question seems to be that all sentient beings have Buddha nature. And the question is then, where does Buddha nature come from? And Rinpoche's response is, well, Buddha nature is not something that is limited to humans, but all living beings have Buddha nature. So, for example, in the Madhyamika scriptures, so in Nagarjuna's and Chandrakirti's scriptures, so in different kinds of scriptures it talks about Buddha nature. So this kind of Buddha nature that is described in the Madhyamika scriptures refers to the lack of inherent existence, or the emptiness of the awareness of mind. So in other words, because of the emptiness because of the emptiness of the mind, the contaminations, the afflictions are not in the nature of the mind. So they're just adventitious and can therefore be eliminated. They can be overcome because they're not in the nature of the mind. The mind is therefore empty because of being empty of inherent existence. Therefore, that establishes that the afflictions are not in the nature of one's consciousness. So this is true not just for human beings. This is true for all sentient beings. So therefore, all sentient beings can become fully enlightened, and the main reason is that the afflictions, that the contaminations are not in the nature of the mind of these sentient beings. So one, with regard to a former question, so Rinpoche would like to add some explanation with regard to the previous question of the equality of men and women. So yes, so with regard to this So with regard to women, so no one is telling the women, for example, during the teachings to sit in the back. No one is saying that. They just do sit in the back. That's kind of culturally determined. And also with regard to the different Buddha figures, like Dharma, for example, it's not that we put the Dharma statue somewhere in the back, and it's actually from the point of view of like hierarchy, from a Buddhist, from a dharmic or a practice point of view, sentient beings, we look at their realizations. It's really like a person is kind of like a higher, if you like, if they have higher kind of realizations. It's like with the caste system. The caste system has no place in Buddhism. So really from a Buddhist practice point of view, those don't really exist. So they're not considered. The differences are not really considered to be like caste difference or gender difference is not considered to be something in accordance with the Dharma hierarchy. So we talk about imprints. So the question before, I think there was a misinterpretation with regard to, it wasn't the question about Buddha nature, but it was more about imprints. So it's just been clarified. The question is about imprints, like imprints, where do they come from? The imprints that are responsible for our rebirth. So from a point of view of imprints, or Rinpoche's response is actually imprints are not what is mainly important. So it's not just imprints themselves that are the main aspect that takes to rebirth, or that is responsible for rebirth. Rinpoche is saying of the 12 links, it's existence that actualizes kind of imprint. So first one accumulates actions. So there are compositional actions. And then in the second moment, when these actions have been completed, they remain in the form of an imprint. And then slowly this imprint remaining in the continuum, it will eventually ripen. So what is actually an imprint? The question was initially, what are these imprints? And Rinpoche says that it's some kind of potential. So when we talk about attachment, for example, when attachment manifests in one's continuum, it's a kind of clear type of awareness, a non-physical awareness. But when it doesn't arise manifestly, when it's not manifest in the continuum, it lies in the form of an imprint. That means some kind of potential in the continuum of a person. So really, it just refers to some kind of potential. So then of the English question, the first question is, wisdom of selflessness would eliminate ignorance, and one achieves liberation and becomes free from suffering. This method that leads to liberation can be practiced by everyone with the same result. Since this is the case, why would there be a need to practice bodhicitta to achieve Buddhahood? When we talk about liberation, so to liberate, what does one liberate oneself? Well, the liberation, that which one liberates oneself, is the root of suffering. So the real root of suffering is the grasping onto the self, grasping at inherent existence of the self. So this kind of awareness which perceives the self wrongly. So this is what one needs to eliminate. Which means that in order to attain liberation, the main kind of method would be the wisdom realizing selflessness. But with regard to Buddhahood, full enlightenment, so we talk about the benefit of oneself and the benefit of others. So in this case, one eliminates the afflictions for the benefit of others. So the emphasis is on others. So one wants to achieve, one strives to achieve a state where one effortlessly is able to work for the benefit of all sentient beings. So for this, it's not sufficient to only eliminate the afflictions, but one needs to. So from the point of view of the method, for example, one needs to generate great compassion and bodhicitta and so forth. And as it's also said in Chandrakirti's supplement to the Middle Way, bodhicitta is great compassion is important at the beginning, the middle, and end. So without great compassion, without bodhicitta, there is a danger that one will be lazy, that one will not really make an effort in practicing, but rather one sleeps the entire day because there's no wish to really be there for the benefit of all sentient beings. So with this compassion, with this type of aspiration, one works sincerely for the benefit of all sentient beings. And also, once one becomes enlightened, one will work for the benefit of all sentient beings until samsara is empty. So until sentient beings are exhausted. And also one talks of all sentient beings, each and every one. So in order to reach such a state where one is able to do so, one needs to have bodhicitta first. So also, with regard to the mind that realizes selflessness, it can eliminate the afflictions, but there are different types of kind of obstructions. They're not just afflictions. So we say, for example, even an arhat does engage in actions such as speaking. That bodhisattva, like an arhat, still engages in kind of harsh speech and so forth because of the imprints that are left, and also there are also kind of limitations. So there are limitations of not knowing all phenomena, for example. So there are still some kind of contaminations left in the continuum of an arhat. So not just the mind that realizes selflessness can eliminate those restrictions, those obstructions, but we need something stronger than that, something stronger than just the awareness realizing selflessness. In other words, another awareness is needed that strengthens the mind that realizes selflessness. So the mind that strengthens the mind that realizes selflessness is bodhicitta. So it's the mind that wishes to benefit all sentient beings. So it gives this mind that realizes selflessness, the wisdom, it gives it incredible strength because it stands at the back, it supports this wisdom and it makes it much stronger in the sense that it pushes it towards enlightenment. So it's a bit like if you push a person, you give them strength from behind, you make that person stronger by just pushing them. So in that way, likewise, when you have bodhicitta and these types of awareness, they make the awareness that realizes selflessness even stronger. So one wants to work for the benefit of all sentient beings, and not just work for all sentient beings that equal space, but also eliminate all their obstructions, work for them in the most effective way. And just the mind that realizes selflessness on its own, without being conjoined with bodhicitta, will not have the strength to overcome the obstructions to enlightenment. Can Rinpoche explain the initiation that is going to take place tomorrow? And in Rinpoche's opinion, if I haven't taken refuge yet, but I'm fully committed to the Dharma, should I receive the initiation? So with regard to the answer, it's difficult to answer this. So before someone asked His Holiness, so there was someone who was a Christian who says, in my next life I want to be a Buddhist. So it's kind of a little similar, the question that was asked here. So with regard to receiving an initiation, we need to have refuge in our continuum. So in order for Dharma to become Dharma, for any kind of activity for it to become Dharma, this becomes the foundation, taking refuge. So it's kind of... So in order to see the disadvantages of suffering and the disadvantages of afflictions, seeing their faults, one needs to take refuge in the Dharma at the least. So this is a very coarse level of taking refuge, but without that it'd be very difficult to engage in practices. So we talk about 4 types of happiness. So a natural kind of happiness, and then happiness from the point of view of association. So when we talk about like a natural kind of happiness, for that we don't need refuge. So it's kind of a natural happiness, a natural kind of virtue. I used the wrong word. So natural virtue, there are 4 types of virtue: natural virtue and associated virtue. So natural virtue is wanting to benefit other sentient beings. So one doesn't have to be a Buddhist in order for this natural kind of virtue to become virtuous, because it's like benefiting all sentient, just benefiting others when they have a problem. So in that case, it's just a virtue in itself. Any kind of virtuous mind in itself is a natural kind of virtue. But then there is the associated one with where the associated mind is responsible for something being a virtue or not. And so with respect to the virtue, to the initiation tomorrow, so with respect to tomorrow, if you do take the initiation, for it to become like this natural, become virtuous, it's difficult without refuge. Also, it's very difficult not to have any kind of introduction to Buddhism and then take an initiation. So, of course, now for 3 days, His Holiness has given some kind of introductory teaching. So these teachings that were given over the 3 days, so there's something. So these kind of. So even if one is not a Buddhist, so these practices can be done even if one doesn't have refuge. So even if one doesn't have refuge, the practices that were described during those 3 days that are like some kind of preparation for the initiation, they can be done even without being a Buddhist. But tomorrow, without being a Buddhist, without having taken refuge, one cannot take the initiation because one has to generate oneself as a meditational deity, and that cannot be done without refuge. We talk about the kind of causal initiation, the resultant, and the path initiation. So with regard to, for example, like highest yoga tantric initiation on Avalokiteshvara, so there are 4 kinds of initiation. So there are definitely 4 types of kind of initiations. So it's kind of like one of the preparatory kind of awarenesses one needs to have is to have bodhicitta and have an understanding of emptiness. So when it gets basically empowered to do the meditational practice, the deity practice, one gets empowered to do this when one receives this kind of initiation. And there's a kind of blessing, one receives the blessing of the deity, so through the mantras, through the substances and so forth, one is then empowered to do the meditational, empowered in the practice of the deity, such that one has now permission to do the practice. So, for example, the vast initiation is in order to for the body to be initiated and so forth. So then from the point of view of body, speech and mind, so you have these different kinds of initiations to bless the body, speech and mind with all the other kind of initiations, so that the body, speech and mind will become of one nature and become of one nature in the sense that becoming the Buddha's body, speech and mind, which are also of one nature. So one takes. So therefore, it's so the first 3 are for the body, speech, and mind. The first 3 initiations, and then the last, the word initiation, is in order to bring the 4 together. So to unite the body, speech, and mind, in order to then have in the future the united, the unity of body, speech, and mind in the continuum of a Buddha. So this is what an initiation is all about. So this is with regard to verse number 49. Is it 14? Yes. The question here: when there's long, there's short, etc. So with regard to this verse, the question is: His Holiness mentioned yesterday, long exists because short exists, and vice versa. Can I infer that good exists because bad exists? If that is so, does this mean it is impossible that good can prevail without bad? If yes, every time we pray for goodness, badness will also prevail. Please confirm my understanding. Confirm like the kalota. Deshi karonada. Ale mutune nederta. 내디그래 영그래. Pedodo. Yaga di pedono duga di pedodo. So here, when we talk about long and short, exist independence on one another. So when we look at this is something independence with regard to a mind. I mean, this means from the point of view of the mind. It depends on the mind, short and long. So Rinpoche says this pen, for example. So from the point of view of how this appears to the mind, when this pen when this mind appears to be long or to be short, it can only do so in relation to something other than itself. So if one has only one object, then to say this is long or this is short is not possible. It's not possible to say something is long without having something else. Which means that it's impossible that an object in and of itself is either long or short. It just means that from the point of view of how it appears, something appears to be long, independent on something shorter. So this is what it means. It's just from the point of view of the appearance to the mind that we say something is long and short. Now from the point of view of good and bad, it's not the same as with short and long. So when we say things are interdependent, they depend on one another. So long and short, cold and hot. This is slightly different. The object, for example, when we say, how does a person become a person? So when we have afflictions, the afflictions that arise in one's continuum, when they arise in one's continuum, they are afflictions when they arise in one's continuum. What they do in one's continuum, that determines whether there are afflictions or not. It's got nothing to do with like, I think these are afflictions, and in comparison to something else they become afflictions. It's not like long and short. If one, for example, subdues one's afflictions, one becomes a good person. If one lets these afflictions run wild, one is a bad person. So it totally depends on that. It depends on the afflictions. In the basis of those, we say a person is good or not. So it's not like long and short that we compare two things and say something is bad or not bad in comparison in the same way as we do long and short. So if we say like a person became a bad person, so it's not that a good person has to appear to one's mental continuum in order to be able to identify a bad person. So it's not. So it has to do with the afflictions and the continuum of the bad person. In dependence on those afflictions, we say it's a bad person. It has nothing to do with seeing a good person in comparison. So this is different to short and long. Without a short object, without seeing a short object, you can't say something is long, and vice versa. So unless if you say this object is long, unless you have something short in comparison, without having something in comparison, you can't say it's long or short. But you can have a bad person because of their afflictions and their continuum. You don't need a good person next to them to be able to say this is a bad person. It's only dependent on their afflictions that's the point that determines whether this is a bad person or not. So therefore we say interdependence has many different stages. There are different levels to it. The next question, with reference to verse 35, which reads, as long as the aggregates are conceived, so long thereby does the conception of I exist. Further, when the conception of I exists, there is action, and from it there is also birth. So with reference to this verse, conception of the I arises from the conception of the aggregates. Does this mean we need to abandon conception of the aggregates first before we can abandon the conception of the I? How does this work? La. So as long as there's grasping at the aggregates, as long do we also have we have grasping at the self. So with regard to those two lines, there are different ways of explanations. Here, when we talk about grasping at the aggregates, we speak about of phenomena and self. We speak about the phenomena here. So if one cannot eliminate the grasping at phenomena, if one is not able to overcome the grasping the grasping of inherent existence at phenomena, one is not able to eliminate the object of the grasping, the mind that grasps at the self, at the inherent existence of the self. And without without eliminating the object of the mind that grasps at the self, one is not able to eliminate the afflictions, because the afflictions, they are responsible for the accumulation of karma and so forth, and then that leads to samsara. So therefore, there's one explanation. Therefore, unless one realizes the selflessness of the phenomena, one does not realize the selflessness of the self, and therefore one is not able to overcome samsara. This is one explanation. So some say that. So there are different explanations. For example, that there are some explanations that they say that the hearers and solitary realizers, they do not realize the selflessness of phenomena. They only realize the selflessness of person. So there is this kind of explanation here. So from the point of view of that explanation, that arhats do not realize the selflessness of phenomena, as long as then so from that point of view, since there's a difference between the selflessness of phenomena and the selflessness of person in terms of subtlety, so then if one doesn't realize the selflessness of phenomena, one cannot realize the selflessness of person. When we talk about equanimity and equal love, how does this relate to partners and husbands and wives? Is having a different or special love for them a bad? Or does it mean you cannot generate true compassion and love for all sentient beings? For all sentient beings, 정말 sentient beings is having a different special love for them bad? Das semsin gashi da tsewa yuna semsin tamshi la ke ma thwa ro re So from the point of view of our way of thinking, that becomes very important in this context. In general, we say there are two types of love. So out of self-centeredness, there's love that comes out of the self-cherishing type of mind. Or there's love of seeing self and others as equally important. So this is the second type of love. So when we talk about love towards one's husband and children and kind of relatives, that's the kind of love. That's the kind of love that comes out of love that is directed towards the happiness just of this lifetime. In general, of course, we need the kind of certain objects in this lifetime, but in general, it's like for the happiness of this lifetime, one's own benefit, that one has love towards these sentient beings, so there's some kind of expectation back. So it's really out of a concern for one's own benefit. So we cannot say that this is 100% not okay to have that kind of love. No, so it's said in the scriptures that so in general, so as an ordinary person, actually, whatever activities we engage in, whether positive or negative, there's always a kind of causal motivation that has self-attachment, always like some kind of self-attachment that causes an activity. So in other words, any positive or negative action, I mean even positive actions in the continuum of an ordinary person cannot actually happen without some kind of attachment. So therefore, this is a kind of so we cannot say it's really something negative, because the kind of love that comes out of that is something positive. But we actually should expand that kind of love, because it's only directed towards a very few people. It's also because only those people benefit us, and because we expect something back for them. So this is why we have love towards them. But actually it is too small, in the sense like the scope is too small. It actually only having love towards those people like husbands and wives and so forth, well, they're just the same as everyone else. All sentient beings are the same in that they want to be happy and do not want to suffer. So we all want to have freedom with regard to birth, aging, sickness and death, but there is just no freedom. For that reason, all sentient beings, oneself and others, are the same in not wanting to be, not wanting to suffer, but wanting to be happy. So taking that as a reason, then we can start thinking, may all sentient beings be free from suffering and have happiness. So this is within this lifetime one can actually expand one's love, where one expands it towards all sentient beings. The focus is towards all sentient beings, by reason of the fact that all sentient beings are the same in not wanting to suffer, but wanting to be happy. But is that enough? Yes, well actually that is enough. So actually, it's enough in the sense that one has love towards all sentient beings, wanting them to be happy and not to be to suffer. Well, that is the same as it is for oneself. So in the same way as they do not want to suffer and they want to be happy, I'm just the same. So therefore, one then has the wish for them also to be happy, and that's actually sufficient as a reason. So So in the same way as one doesn't wish for oneself to be unhappy, and one wishes for oneself happiness, therefore one wishes the same for other sentient beings. So in the same way as we have love towards ourselves, in the sense that we want ourselves to be happy, we then direct that same towards other sentient beings. That's the same reason. So one has love towards oneself. Why? Because oneself doesn't want to suffer and one wants to be happy. And then one directs that type of mind towards others. So others are exactly the same as oneself, not wanting to suffer and wanting to be happy. And then it's same. Likewise, as I said in the 8th chapter of Panchadeva's Bodhisattva way of life. So from the point of view of, for example, of one's future happiness, one's own happiness is dependent on other sentient beings. So, for example, when we talk about kind of riches, for example, if there's some kind of riches that are in the earth that help us to gain more riches, we need to protect them. So likewise, the riches that we get, our happiness comes from all sentient beings, so we need to protect them. If we want to have happiness, then if our happiness comes from other sentient beings, we need to protect sentient beings. So it's like if we harm sentient beings, it's a bit like if you were standing on the branch of a tree and we cut down the tree on which we are standing, and so we fall down. So in the same way, if we harm sentient beings, we actually harm ourselves. So also it says in the 8th chapter of this text, unless we let go of let go of our grasping on the self or our self-cherishing, we will never gain happiness. So unless it's like fire, unless we get rid of the fire, we cannot get rid of heat. So if I don't want heat, but I will take the fire, if I hold on to fire, but I don't want the heat, well, that doesn't work. So likewise, without letting go of the self-grasping, there's no way. Without letting go of the self-grasping, there's just no way of obtaining happiness. So this is what Shantideva explains in his 8th chapter. So we need to. So usually the way we think, the way we reflect upon things. So whatever benefits oneself. Whoever benefits oneself, we say it's a good person. So we always take ourselves as like the center. Because they do something good to me, they're a good person. Because they harm me, they're a bad person. So because one time they expressed, they showed me like a negative kind of face. They weren't nice to me. They didn't smile at me. So for that reason, we don't like someone. So it's only like always in relation to myself. They didn't benefit me, so therefore they're not a good person. So really, we need to reflect. Does this really make sense to just kind of take it in relation to oneself? We need to think a little vaster, like is this person a good person or not, like from other point of view, not just taking us as the kind of criterion for whether they're good or not. Okay, so here the question is, and Yangten Sepa is saying it's verse number 8, 9, and 10 in the Precious Garland, so it relates to this question. The question here is, yesterday His Holiness mentioned 16 factors leading to a higher rebirth. What are the 16 factors? So not killing, not stealing, forsaking the mates of others, refraining completely from false, device, harsh, and senseless speech. Thoroughly forsaking covetousness, harmful intent, and the views of nihilists. These are the 10 gleaming paths of action. Their opposites are dark. not drinking intoxicants, a good livelihood, non-harming, respectful giving, honoring the honorable, and love. Practice in brief is that. So these are the kind of 16 factors or methods to be reborn in the higher realms. Yeah, so they kind of accomplish, if you like, they're the 16 factors which cause a higher rebirth. So the question is, what are those 16? So basically Rinpoche is saying these refer to refraining from the 10 negativities and then engaging in 6 virtues. So the 10 non-virtues, one refrains from those, and then not drinking intoxicants, living a good livelihood, not harming, giving respectfully, honoring the honorable, and love.
Wrong life.
So it's a kind of a correct or a right kind of living that one engages in. So a good livelihood here refers to that. And then not engaging in drinking intoxicants, taking drugs. So not harming others, not being violent. So when we talk about generosity, so we sometimes, when we engage in generosity, we consider the other person to be below us. So actually giving to someone, of course the act of giving is just a mental state basically. So when one really gives sincerely, one has the wish to sincerely give, that's what we call generosity. So that's a mental state. And here the giving is a respectful kind of giving. And then here with regard to honoring, so we should honor our parents, we should honor the teacher, we should honor those who have great qualities. So elderly people, those who have great education or great qualities, and the 3 jewels. So from the point of view of the 3 jewels being objects, so all those are honorable objects. We talk about that which is honorable, that which is suitable to be honored. So these are the objects one should honor. And then there's love. So love, here's the wish. The wish for others to be happy. So here when we talk about affectionate love, the wish of the feeling of closeness towards sentient beings, actually they assist one another. So they assist one another as in like to strengthen one another, likewise with compassion. So those minds, they strengthen one another, love, compassion and affectionate love. When we meditate, we do so with a gross mind. Is it possible to meditate with the subtle mind? So usually the explanation of coarser and subtler minds is found in the tantric teachings. So only in the context of like meditating on concentration one has an explanation in the sutric system on coarser and subtler minds. So here by overcoming mental sinking and laxity, mental sinking and excitement, one is able to attain subtler types of mind in the sutric system. So from the tantric point of view, the subtler kind of minds, the real subtle minds, that's only explained in the it's only explained in the tantric system, and they're also of the 4 classes. Only in the highest yoga tantra class is there an explanation of manifesting the highest mind. So, for example, in the Guya Samaja Tantra, it's explained it's important to that is not eliminate, but to stop the working of the coarser minds in order for the subtle mind to become for the subtle mind to manifest, and this is by focusing on the points in the body, the different points of the body. In that way, one is able to in order to put to have the minds absorb into the central channel and so forth, then one is able for the subtler minds to become manifest. So here we say that the mind and the energy, or the energy winds, since they're of one nature, so the mind, the winds have to enter into the central channel. So when the winds, the energy winds, enter in the central channel, so when they enter in the central channel, then all the different channels, they open, the wheels of the central channel, they start opening up, and when that happens, the subtler minds can actually manifest. And so otherwise, so it's through this practice of like the winds in the body and like bringing them into the central channel that the subtle mind can arise. But this is only possible if one previously has done the practices of the generation stage. So with regard to the subtle clear-light mind, so once that subtle mind has been generated, then one can use it to meditate on emptiness and realize emptiness, and then one transforms it into the death, intermediate state and rebirth of a deity. But initially it's important to learn about the sutric system, the sutric system, and then go through the different path of accumulation and so forth that are explained in this system. His Holiness said today that we have to generate compassion towards people who harm us because they're committing negative karma. How do we know if we have to do something for this person in order to help to stop doing these actions, and how can we help them? So when we take an example, so if someone helps, if one does something negative, one harms oneself, if one then, while one does very positive actions to really benefit others, so this other person, if one does something positive, they may become jealous, they may be competitive and so forth. And as a reason for that, will try to harm oneself. But actually, as a result of this negative action that they engage in, they will accumulate negative karma. So in the future, even though they may not suffer right now, but in the future they will suffer. It's just a matter of time. So because they have accumulated the cause for suffering, and so therefore it's just a matter of time that they will experience the result of that problem. So we should really reflect upon, is there really a person who's harming us? So there's a way to reflect upon that. Or we should think maybe they're a manifestation of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So they're actually not real negative people, but they're helping us as in the form of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, manifesting in that way. So anyway, there's many different kinds of ways of reacting, of thinking first and then reacting as a result. So then when someone when someone harms oneself, one understands the situation much better. And so then there are many different stages of then generating compassion for that person. So when we talk about generating compassion, So with regard to the person harming us, we need to counteract, we need to go against the activity itself. We should counteract or go against the activity that they do. So when they harm us, when they kick us, etc. So it doesn't mean that we should just have everyone walking over us. So actually to be compassionate here or to be patient means not to get angry. So if we cannot stop the action of the other person, so if we get angry instead of being patient, in the first moment we get angry, right there's negativity we accumulate, and not just negativity that is accumulated. On top of that, we also become unhappy. So our peace of mind is disturbed the moment anger arises. So if someone asks a question with regard to what is all phenomena, what does all phenomena refer to? If another person were to answer everything that is in the teachings of the Buddha, in the sutras, that's all phenomena. What would be the answer with regard to what all phenomena are? So actually, not every question has to be answered. If one asks what are all phenomena, I mean there's already been answered whatever the Buddha. There's also other cases, Rinpoche says, where the Buddha didn't answer a question. So to say, what are all phenomena? So Rinpoche is saying the Buddha didn't answer all the questions, so I can also remain silent here and not answer this question, because with regard to all phenomena, this person must have had something in their mind when they asked this question, what are all phenomena? And Rinpoche says, I don't know what this person had in their mind when they asked this question, so it's not necessary to answer what all phenomena are. So there's also another explanation when you debate dutta, for example, or collected topics. So we say, for example, whatever exists is either permanent or impermanent. So some people say some people would say both phenomena, which are permanent and impermanent. So are they either permanent or impermanent? So actually we say, when we say permanent and impermanent phenomena, they are actually permanent. So there's a way of answering. But when we say all phenomena, so it doesn't really have any kind of essence when you say what are all phenomena. So with regard to before permanent and impermanent, there's a way to answer. But here that doesn't really have an essence what to say with regard to what all phenomena are. So that should suffice for today.